said, to talk about mental health, something that I'm very passionate about and something that I have taken time to specialize in. So when we talk about mental health, we are basically talking about someone being at their optimum well-being, being able to function in the community, to make a positive contribution to the community. But also we are talking about someone being able to cope with their daily stresses. So life comes with its stresses each and every day, but is an individual able to cope with this adequately? So if someone is able to do that, then we say that they are mentally well. So you have to understand that there is a subjective part of it, in that someone will tell you that they are either feeling well or they are not feeling well. But there's also a part to do with the functioning. So even if, because someone may say that they are doing well, but from the way the rest of the world is seeing them, they are not able to function well. Case in point, someone may not have insight into the kind of illness they have. So they will feel like on their side, they are feeling well, but the rest of us who are looking at them, we see that they are not functioning well. So that may also play a role in us saying that, does someone have mental illness or do they not have mental illness? So when we are looking at mental health, we look at it from a continuum. So it's not that it's binary, that you either have mental illness or you're normal, or you are at your optimum mental health. There's always a middle ground between you being mentally well and having a fully blown mental illness. So how I could explain this, so there's being mentally well, then in between there, sometimes you get stressed a bit, what we call stress. So you're stressed a bit, maybe you've lost a job, and you find that this stresses, and you may get some symptoms of emotional disturbance. You're feeling sad. It may affect your sleep for some time, but you're still able to function and you're still able to bounce back. So we will not say that you're mentally ill at that point. It is some form of distress that you have, and you can bounce back from it. But on the other end, then there is the mental illness, whereby symptoms come and they actually affect your functioning. So when they start affecting your functioning and you cannot bounce back on your own, then we start talking about mental illness. And also in that perspective, mental illness is also, it's not of the same intensity. So you find that some people have mild symptoms of mental illness, others have moderate, and others have very severe mental illness. And all this is important because it will depend on what help they will get. For example, you find that some individuals, when they have some form of mental illness, then they may just, for example, if we take an example of depression, so some people may have mild depression, and just some form of counseling from a professional or even sometimes from a close friend can help them bounce back to normal. But then there are those who have moderate symptoms, and then there are those who have severe symptoms. And you find that those ones, simple counseling may not help them. They may need more structured counseling, or even on the other end, they may need to get medication to help them bounce back from that situation. So that is very important for us to have at the back of our mind, that we are all not at the same point, but it doesn't mean that you either have mental illness or you're okay. There's always a middle ground from which you can either bounce back to being mentally well, or you can worsen to get a fully blown mental illness. So we need to have that at the back of our minds. So, and we also need to know that there are different kinds of mental illness. So we tend to think that the only person who is mentally ill or who is mentally unwell, let me just use the word unwell, is a person that you see on the streets and is unkempt and is not eating, is eating dirty stuff. So that is the more obvious form, but there are also other subtle forms that may affect even us who may not have that kind of illness. So we need to know that it varies, because when we know that, then we know that at what point we need to seek for help. So there are different kinds of mental illness. That's the thing that we need to have at the back of our mind. So commonly you've heard of depression, as we have Bishop talked about before, but there are other things like anxiety disorders, which I'll talk about in a bit of detail later. And but then there are also the more serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, as I'll talk about later, whereby usually when people get these symptoms, most times all times need medication to help them bounce back to their normal states, or to something to a state in which they can be functional in society. So mental illness has been there for as long as even times in the Bible. It's not that when you read the Bible, you see something that says this one was mentally unwell or this one wasn't mentally well. But there are some subtle things that you can pick up and say that this one had some form of distress or mental ill health. So you see that, so those symptoms are there. You see individuals in the Bible with some of those symptoms. And the good news is that there are a number of people, even when we see that they had some of those symptoms, were able to bounce back. So that's the good news that is in that. But then there are also individuals who had some of these symptoms and were not able to bounce back. So I will talk about some of those individuals to help us see that this problem has been there for quite some time. So I will start with one of the commonest mental illnesses, which is depression. So depression is what we would call a mood disorder. It affects someone's mood. So someone's mood is the way someone, it's their predisposition, the way that they see the environment, the lenses through which they see they perceive the environment, and it's rather more persistent than just the emotion that someone feels. So the emotion is just what you feel at a given period of time. So someone may come and tell you something nice and you'll be happy at that moment. But for the mood, it's more pervasive. It's more constant for a longer period of time, and it colors the way you see the environment. So if someone is in a depressed mood, even though once in a while they may become happy about something, but generally they are sad, and the way they see life, they really see it from a negative point of view. So in depression, someone will basically have a sad mood, but in addition to that, they will lose interest in the things that they previously liked. Their appetite will change, in that you find that they may either overeat or they may refuse to eat. And then it will also affect their sleep patterns. You find that some individuals will either oversleep or undersleep, depending on how they present. And as it progresses, people reach extents of failing to concentrate on their work. You're easily forgetful. You start feeling like life is really not worth it. Feel hopeless, and on the worst end of things, actually people feel like life is not worth living, and that's where we start getting suicidal thoughts. I wish I would die. And then at the end of the day, some people actually go on to attempt suicide, and some, unfortunately, are very successful in that attempt, and we lose them. So that is depression. And why I want to talk about it is that it's one of the commonest mental illnesses, affecting about 20% of the population. So if you're to consider the world having 6 billion people. Maybe now there are 7 billion. But if we take it at 6 billion, so it will mean that 1.2 billion people at least have had a depressive episode. So that is quite a big number. So that's why I wanted to talk about it. That is quite a big number. So at least 1 in 5 people that you meet somewhere has had an episode of depression, which is such a big number. And why I also want to talk about it is that we have some examples in the Bible. So I will not say that these people were depressed per se, because usually to make the diagnosis, you need to have been there to talk to them. But from what you read in their text, you kind of pick up that they were sad, that they were not happy, that there was something going on in their lives that distressed them. Take an example of someone like Job. Job is an individual that I think most of us do know. And he was afflicted. He was one of those people that was really afflicted. The devil took his chance and afflicted his family. He lost his family at a go, lost all his wealth, and then also was afflicted by illness. And when you're reading his text, at some point he makes statements that make you see that he was tired of living. You see, as I was reading, for example, I came across a text that says, I quote as he's speaking, that's Job chapter 6, verse 11. He says, "What is my strength that I should hope? What is my end that I should prolong my life?" So this is a kind of person that is thinking, and what is the point in me continuing to live? So these are the kinds of statements that someone who is depressed and is thinking about ending their life can say, can make. And on this note, I would want to tell us that when anyone makes such statements, it's not that any person who is not ill can make such a statement. You know, as human beings and generally living things, we are wired to survive. So it's always our instinct, whatever comes our way, to try to survive something. So when someone makes a statement like this, what is the point of me? Basically saying, what is the point of me living? It means that something is going on. So I'd like to urge us all that if in any case you ever hear someone make a statement like this, or make a statement like, life is not worth it, I wish I were dead, we take them serious, because people don't just make these statements. When someone makes a statement like this, something is going on, and most times they're actually contemplating ending their life. And if we intervene at that point, then we'll be able to save them from such a disaster. But going back to the point, when you look at someone like Job at this point, due to the physical illness that he was facing, plus all these other losses that he has gone through, we see someone who is in despair, who is feeling hopeless at this point, feeling like life is not worth it. Well, I cannot speak for how his sleep patterns and how his eating patterns were, but for someone in such pain, they were probably not sleeping well, they were probably not eating well, which are all signs of depression. So probably at this point, that's how they were feeling. That's how he was feeling. So, but the good news is that he is one of the examples of resilience, because it's that even with all that he went through, he was able to survive this. His friends constantly told him, "Why don't you curse God and die?" But there was that hope that he had that didn't let him end his life. But what I want us to pick out of this is that when someone is in despair, when someone has lost something significant to them, they sometimes reach this place of feeling hopeless and life is not worth it, and they may make such statements. But we as individuals need to be our brother's keeper, and when we notice something is wrong, help them, or at least help them seek for help, for the help that they need. So that is something that is very, very important. But even as we go on to read, so there are quite a number of scenarios like that. Even when you read the book of Jeremiah, Jeremiah was one of the Old Testament prophets who was sent to the house of Israel, but he faced quite an amount of opposition, being imprisoned by the king, and so it was his journey was not an easy one, as he tried to teach people, or to tell people what the Lord had told him about the nation of Israel. And you see that in his speech, there are moments where he was very distressed. There are moments when he cursed the day that he was born, meaning that he reached a point and wished that he was never alive. So we need to know that in moments of despair, people can reach such points where they wish that they were not alive. We need not to stigmatize them. We need not to shun them. We need not to think that they are fallen, they are sinners and all that. They do need our help, and we need to be able to offer them our help, or at least see that they get help from someone who can give it to them. However, there are some few examples, obviously, in the Bible of people that did end their lives in those moments of despair, which obviously it is not something that would want to happen to anyone. So there are quite a few examples in the Bible that you can see of people who, at the point where they felt very disparate, they actually opted to end their own lives. And from a mental health perspective, I would say that suicide, we don't necessarily define it as a mental illness, but it is a pointer to mental illness. As I've said, every individual, every living thing is wired to survive. It's wired to live on. It's wired to find a way to solve their issues and move on and live on. But if someone chooses on their own to terminate their life, then usually there's something wrong there, especially if they're going through a period of distress. So an example that I can give in that regard is a man called Ahithophel. I think some of us may know him. So his story is in the book of, I think it's the book of 2 Samuel, chapter 16 and 17, right around there. So he was an advisor to King David. But the story around that time is that King David's son Absalom had defected and had sought to take over the kingdom from his father, and he had actually taken over Jerusalem, and David had fled with some of his men. So Ahithophel, who had been King David's advisor, on the other hand, decided to go with Absalom. And we are told that he was such a wise man that listening to him was like listening to the oracles of God. So that's how accurate his advice was. And so he took on the role of advising King Absalom, who had taken over the kingdom at that point. But we see that at some point, that's in towards the end of at the beginning of chapter 17. We see that he gave Absalom some advice that, let me get some men and go and attack your father in the night, and we shall smite him and we shall kill him. So at that point, Absalom had met another gentleman, Hushai, who was also a friend of David, but instead had sort of like come into Absalom's camp to act as if he was on Absalom's part, but yet was still on David's side. So when Absalom went and shared this advice with this other gentleman, Hushai actually said that this is the wrong advice and gave him a different kind of advice. So you read the story to see what. He gave him a different form of advice, and Absalom disregarded Ahithophel's advice at that point. And then we see at the end of the day, Absalom followed the other man's Hushai's advice. And when Ahithophel found out that his advice wasn't followed, he packed his things and went back to his place and put his life in order, and then he hung himself. So that is a story that didn't end well, obviously. So this was a very wise man, but at the end of the day, when things didn't work out the way he wanted them to work out, the path that he chose was to end his life. So this is quite an interesting story. First of all, what I would want to draw our attention to, as in the previous story, is that this man went home and put his affairs in order. So this was a well thought out plan for him. So he sat down, he planned that I will end my life, and he went and started putting things in order. So that also brings us back to the point that there are always signs when someone is in distress and they are going to do something as bad as trying to take their own lives. So this is a man who probably was still had some more years to live, I guess, but he went and started putting his affairs in order. So what I would want us to pick out from this place is that when you see someone, there are always pointers that someone may want to commit suicide to end their own life. So when a man like this one, for example, if a 40-year-old man with no illness, with nothing really that you would say would kill him the very next day, and he comes home and starts putting his life in order, you should be a bit cautious and ask and be like, what is going on? When someone starts making statements like, when I die, you take my car, something like that, sort of like giving out their property, we need to be very cautious and ask, why are you doing things like that? Why are you doing things like you want to be alive tomorrow? Because they may have something that they are thinking about of something like harming themselves. So we need to be cautious about such signs. But also we need to know that some people reach a point of despair, and if in those points, for them, they feel like there's no way out for me, and the best thing that I can do for myself is end my life. And this kind of thinking, obviously, is very common in depressive illness. So we need to really watch out for that. So that is one person whose story didn't go well, because there could, if we are looking at it from here, there could have been all other options that there's always a way out. There's always another option that you could take. But what happens in depressed individuals is that they feel like, I have no other option at this point other than end my life. So one of the ways we help them is to try to think of other options of solving that problem that they have, because sometimes they think that the only solution to my problem is to kill myself. The only way that I can help myself or help others is to end my own life. So we need to watch out for such things. So those are some of the examples of some form of depressive illness that we can see in the Bible. So I wanted to talk about that because that is one of the common mental illnesses that we see in our settings. And I think we need to be able to offer them help, either us as individuals or at least direct them to someone who can help them. But then there are also other examples of mental ill health that we can see in the Bible. One interesting example is King Saul. So King Saul was quite, from a mental health perspective, he's quite, an interesting individual. He was the first king of Israel. When the Israelites decided they wanted a king, he was the first king that the Lord gave them. And in at some point in the Bible where you really see that there could be something wrong mentally was around, I think, history in First Samuel, around chapter 16, when they start talking about him being afflicted by a tormenting spirit. So obviously that will also bring me to the discussion of what is what we would say is mental illness and what we would say is being afflicted by
demon.
Being afflicted by evil spirits or something like that. So that's the first point we see. So in chapter 16, 1 Samuel chapter 16, they say he was afflicted by a tormenting spirit, and his servants recommended that he gets someone to play a harp for him, and they got David to play a harp for him. And whenever he played a harp for him, they said the evil spirit went off him, and he was able to go back to normal. So we see that at this point, his behavior wasn't normal. At this point, from scripture, you can see that his behavior wasn't normal. And every time they did play for him a harp, he improved. So when we look at this from a mental health perspective, obviously we see that this could have been episodes of some form of mental illness. It could have been depression, that every time they played for him music, that sort of lifted up, which are some of the things that we can actually use in managing depression. Some people will tell you that when I listen to uplifting music, then my mood lifts up. So that is one of the things. But then also it's the same thing is talked about later on in scripture. I think in the same 1 Samuel chapter 19, they talk about an almost similar incident when an evil spirit would come upon him, and he had a javelin in his hand, and he would try to nail David to the wall with that javelin. And we see that immediately after that period, King Saul was quite paranoid. He thought David was after him, and he did his best to try to look for David and try to end his life. So we see some form of mood instability at that point. So in some moments, he's very sad and he needs music to be played to lift his mood. But then at some other point, we see that he's very angry at David and wants to kill him, and he thinks David is the source of all his troubles, and he basically is against David and will do anything to do away with David. So there are some mental illnesses that present with such mood instabilities. Obviously, as I've said earlier, we may not be able to point a diagnosis at it and say King Saul had this or King Saul had that. But we see that there was some form of mood instability that used to disturb him at some point or the other, that affected him at one point or the other. So that is another form of mental instability that we do see in the Bible. So that brings me to the discussion of, is mental illness, is there something that would call being demon possessed versus having mental illness? So what I will have to say about that is that from what science has shown, so I'll talk about from a scientific point of view, and we can talk about from the other point of view. From a scientific point of view, is that studies have shown that even with these mental illnesses, there is always an imbalance. So we've tried to study to see what could be going wrong in the body of an individual to cause the symptoms that we see. So studies have been done, and they show that there could be some chemicals that are not well balanced in the brain of an individual that could cause the symptoms that we see, that would cause the depression that we could see, that could cause all these things that we see. So that is sort of like the biological basis of the illness. I will not say that biology has managed to explain the range of mental illness. So obviously there's still research going on. There are still questions that we are trying to answer. So most times when you're talking as regards biology or medicine, we are talking theories, what we think could be able to explain what we are seeing. For example, we know that in depression, there's a certain chemical that is responsible for mood. Studies have shown that it is sometimes low. It's usually low, actually most times low in these individuals. And that gives us the basis of the medication that we give to these individuals that helps to do away with the depression, to improve their mood. So the studies have been going on, they're still ongoing. I will not say that we have reached the point of saying that, just like we know that malaria, there's this parasite that causes malaria. So I will not say that we have reached that point in the science of mental illness to pinpoint something and say, this, when you have this, you obviously have this. We may not be at that level, especially for most of the mental illnesses, but studies are still going on, and we're still trying to discover what could be causing these symptoms that we see that present as mental illness in individuals. So there's always room for an alternative explanation, but we know that there are medications that work and help these individuals. But apart from medication, I will not say that medication is the only thing that works for mental illness. There are other ways that we can help these individuals. There are other things. Actually, you find that some individuals may not get medicine, but there are other things that will help them get better. So one of those, very importantly, is the role of church, is the role of faith. You find that many people, when they do get this support that they get from church, from close friends, it does in quite a number of cases help to improve the symptoms that they do have. So we do not say that in mental health, in psychiatry, we never say that the only help that we basically look at mental illness and management of mental illness more we look at it in an aspect that is bigger than just giving someone a pill, because some people even don't need the pill, the medication, but they still get better. So we do not look at it as something that just needs a pill to make the person better. Sometimes they need it, sometimes they may not need it, but there are other things that we can do to improve and to make the symptoms of the individual better. So that's what I could. Hello? Yes?
Could I say something or ask something?
Yes, no problem.
Could you talk about the issue of stigmatization, especially in relation to church?
Yes.
Because when a person gets mental illness, there is that phrase we always use that, So is it possible for you to kind of go through the different scenarios? I believe some people go through, have mental illnesses as a result of evil spirits. But then there is also probably diet things that they are not feeding well, people are not sleeping, or people are going through excessive stress and things like that. Then decisions people take. Some people wake up in the morning and they say, God has told me to go to the mountain and fast for 1 month, and they are isolated, and by the time they come out, whatever they are saying is not coordinated. So could you talk about that context?
Okay. Thank you, Bishop. So we need to know about the causes of mental illness. I don't want us to look at mental health. Now I'm talking about mental health. I don't want us to see it in isolation. So our mental health and our physical health matters. So one of the things that we try to advocate for as mental health workers is self-care. So self-care is very, very important for us to have optimum health. Because there are things that we may not necessarily be able to control about the cause of us getting mental illness. So some people who may have genetic risk. So we know that if your close relatives have mental illness, you have a higher chance of getting mental illness than someone who doesn't. And then there are these, so that you may not have so much control about, but there are things that we do have control about, and that is what we call self-care. So these are things, this is very, very important for us to optimize our mental health. So we need to make sure that we do take care of ourselves in all situations, because first of all, we know that self-care does affect our physical health. So people obviously usually know that when I feel badly, when I eat, but that will at some point affect the way our diet will somehow affect our mental health. Mostly is that if people do not take off time to have, first of all, to make sure that they do eat at the right time and to eat the right, a balanced diet, as we always say, the right food may end up affecting your mental health. So we need to take off time and for self-care, taking off time to rest. Our body needs rest. We are wired to get some amount of rest so that our body can recuperate, so that our immune system can function well, so that we can consolidate things in our memory. So all those are important things about sleep. So when you don't take off time to sleep, you find that you easily get fatigued, you will easily get mood swings, your memory will have issues. So those aspects of self-care, sleep, having your diet, understanding when you're tired and taking time off. So it's not evil, it's not bad that when you find yourself fatigued at work, you decide to take off time. If you find that you're working long hours, you can decide that a few days of the week I'll go home early just to take care of myself and make sure I get enough rest for myself. So self-care is very, very important, because all these things that stress us compound to what may present as mental illness. So we need to.
Doctor.
Yes.
There are some questions which have come in. I hope you've also been reading. One of them is about using brain scans for self-care. I mean, for diagnosis. Is there any way can this thing be detected by scans? Is there the brain activity?
Yes.
Go ahead.
So that may not be conclusive. Scans may not really be conclusive for mental illness at this point in time. So there are some mental illnesses that may arise due to a problem in the brain. For example, you'll find that some people, when they maybe have a brain tumor or some issue in the brain, they may present with signs of mental illness. But most of the mental illness that we see, actually these people may not have any issue. You will do a brain scan, and the brain scans at least that we have in Uganda may look normal, because the structure of the brain, these scans usually show us the structure of the brain. The structure of the brain is generally the normal structure as any other person. But the issues really in mental illness most times come in to do with the chemicals in the brain. So these scans may not show what is happening in the chemicals of the brain. So that's why you may be able to pick them up. The doctor may ask for it just to see if there's any other thing going on in your brain that could be causing what you're seeing. But most of them may not show much. So sometimes most times the doctors may not ask for them.
Then is there an issue like common issues like a person being so suspicious or lying too much? If a person lies too much about everything, or is too negative, you're going to build a house, you won't finish it. You're going to cross the road, a car is going to knock you. You want to get married, you'll be divorced, and they're like either lying too much or too much negative. Could that also be?
Yes, so mental illness, I should say, is quite wide. So that may fall under what we call personality disorders. So there are some kinds of illnesses that we call personality disorders, where you find that people have personalities that may not fall in the normal range. For example, you have individuals who have antisocial personality disorders. These are people who don't per se have mental illness, but they just end up always doing negative things. These are the people you find will steal, will lie. So you won't say that this person has a mental illness, but they have an issue with personality. Then you find the personality that is very avoidant, that is very, they try to avoid social interactions. They are, scared of getting close to people. They are very scared of participating in activity. But it's not that they have mental illness per se, but it's a personality problem. Then there's a personality that is very paranoid. So these are people that are very suspicious of what other people are doing and think people that are against them. But it's not to the extent of saying that they have one of the mainstream mental illnesses, but they have personality, what we call personality disorders. And those we don't treat with medication, but we do lots of counseling that may help someone get back to normal. Or have a more or less normal personality type.
There are two other questions which have come in. One is very interesting. Okay, they're both very interesting. The first one is there first aid? Okay, if you encounter a person who has just hit a depression or that kind of thing, what should be the first things that should be done? Number two, if a person has been in it a long time and has actually given up on life, they don't care about themselves anymore. They don't care about, they have disconnected from the world. You give them food, they eat. You don't give them, they don't eat. They don't care about how they look. They don't change their hair. They even when they buy new things, they keep them with tags, with the purchase tags, and they are just like that. So those will be our final questions for today. Then you will give us your closing remarks after that.
So so first aid for depression, I wouldn't say that there's first aid per se, but when you meet someone that is depressed, one of the major things, obviously, that I think we all should worry about is that, does this person have any thoughts or feelings of self-harm in any way, they're harming themselves or even ending their life? So that is one of the biggest things that we fear with depression. Because if that is a possibility, then you have to make sure you prevent that. If it means keeping watch over them for 24 hours, well and good, but we have to prevent self-harm, because that is the thing. So, first aid is that first help that you give to prevent further damage. So that is the thing that we worry most about with depression. But if that is not there, you assess, and at least from what they've been doing, that is not there, then I think the next way is to see that you get them help. So if they're willing to talk to you as a person, then they can talk to you and share with you what is going on. or you could get them a counselor or someone that they want to talk to. So I always feel that it's very important for people with depression to be able to talk to someone, because when you talk to someone, usually the people with depression have something that is, but it usually arises from something bothering them or something like that. But if they get to talk to someone, then you may help to change their perspective of how they are viewing their problem, and you may help to build some hope. So when we are talking to a depressed person, our biggest role is to make sure we build hope in them, because one of the things that they go through is feeling hopeless. And then if you feel like you may not be able to do much, then it's important that you get them some form of professional help. But for a depressed person, one thing that you worry about is, are they going to harm themselves? The second question was, what was it? It was, what was it? People who have given up. Who have given up on themselves. So that is a very common symptom of depression, that someone feels that they've given up and, life is not worth it. Come what may, they really don't care. So obviously, if it's very severe, you may need to get them some form of professional help, because even professional counselors and psychologists have a way that they approach these patients slowly to help them do gain some hope back. But what you can do as an individual is, first of all, do not give up on them. But second of all, do your best to see if you can communicate hope, communicate comfort as you get them to a profession. Because I cannot go into the details of what professionals do, because that may be quite a lot. But in our speech,
how about people who talk to themselves? They always are talking. They never keep quiet. And they're talking.
That is a bit tricky, because there are some people who just naturally talk to themselves. That may be okay, but what is not okay is someone talking, but they feel like they are talking to someone else. So let's say I may have a presentation to do, and I just keep talking to myself, sort of like rehearsing what's going on or imagining a conversation. But what is mental illness is, I am talking, but I feel like there's someone else I'm talking to. And that person is replying and I'm talking back. So in psychiatry, we call it hearing voices. So you're sort of like hearing voices talking to you and you're replying to them. So that may be is an mental illness.
There's also seeing people.
Yeah, and then they start. Yeah, those who start seeing people start seeing things. That is a form of mental illness. One of the severe mental illnesses, we call it schizophrenia. So these people mainly hear voices that are not there, and then talk to people that are not there. They can see these people that are not there. That is a big problem. And usually those kinds of illnesses do not go away with just simple counseling. So those are people who usually do need medication to do away with these symptoms.
Your final thoughts? So
my final thoughts about mental health is that I think this is something that we need to embrace, and we need to know that it does happen. But one of the things that I want us to do away with is stigma, because stigma affects these people getting help. Most people will say that I'd rather die with my stigma, with my depression or with my anxiety or whatever is disturbing me, than tell people, because people will judge me. So we need to have a non-judgmental stance. If someone is dealing with issues, let's not say that they are not, let's not come up with things like they are sinners, they don't have enough faith. Let's be able to work with them, because that's how it starts. It will be a simple problem, and then they'll start feeling guilty that I don't have enough faith, and then they'll feel I'm not good enough, and then they'll drop out of church, which was usually interesting for them before, and then it will go and be a downward spiral. So we need not to judge them, we need to support them, communicate with hope, and where necessary, can seek for professional help. It's there, and at the end of the day, we need you alive. You're better for us when you're alive.
So, Dr. Arinda, before you go, do you feel you've exhausted the things you wanted to share, or we can give you another day to continue sharing the things you wanted to share?
Maybe if I'm to get another day, I would want it to be more of a Q&A so that I can know what people actually want to know about mental illness and mental health generally, so that we can address some of those issues.
Okay, I think we can have that on Thursday.
On Thursday? Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think Thursday will be okay.
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Arinda. You have shed a lot of light on issues that we have been thinking about and battling about. But one of the key things I have left with in this program is that we should not stigmatize. And sometimes we stigmatize by the way we speak. You say, "Oyomularu, oyomularu." Even if a person has recovered, we keep telling them they are mad. And sometimes people fear to go for counseling or what, because people are going to put a label on them. So I want to encourage us not to stigmatize people. And if you know you're not feeling well, you are not happy, you are already sad, you find it hard to even come out of yourself to say something, you may not be mentally happy, and there is a way you can be helped. We've heard from the expert that there is a possibility. So on Thursday she'll be back. On Thursday night she'll be back, and she'll be talking to us about more things like that. Tomorrow we're going to have a personal testimony from someone who has gone through depression, how far down she went and how she bounced back. So we want to stop right here. It's 5 minutes past midnight. We want to thank you so much for having taken time to be here. If you would like help, please let us know. We will connect you to the person who was the facilitator, so you can have a one-on-one, or alternatively be available on Thursday so that we can see what to do. From me to you is God bless you. And we will see you tomorrow, lunch hour and the evening service. We love people and we love you. Bye for now.
Bye. No.